There's only one book in the Bible where God's name is never mentioned. Not once. Which at first feels strange until you realize this might actually be the most relatable book. Because it's about trying to do the right thing when God isn't narrating your decisions out loud. No burning bush, no thus saith the Lord, just pressure, risk, and I hope this works. Today we're talking about the book of Esther. And we're going to start with King Xerxes. And this guy throws a party that lasts 180 days. And that's not a party, that's a lifestyle. At some point, you're not hosting, you're just living at Applebee's. For 6 months, he's showing off his wealth, his power, his kingdom. And then because apparently that wasn't enough, he throws a second feast. Because nothing says I'm satisfied like immediately starting another party. Now, during this feast, he decides, bring Queen Vashti in. I want everyone to see how beautiful she is. And Vashti says, no. No explanation, no dramatic speech, just no. Honestly, one of the boldest one-word answers in Scripture. And the king's advisors panic. Not because of morality, but because they're like, if word gets out that a wife said no, that the wife of the king said no, we're all in trouble. So their solution? Fire the queen. Which feels like a slight overreaction. But then the king decides after he does it, he fires her, and then he decides a little later down the line he's lonely. So now we meet Esther. She's Jewish, raised by her cousin Mordecai, and she gets swept into this royal selection process that the king's advisors put together. And let's be honest, this isn't exactly a wholesome find your soulmate situation. It's more like the king will sample the dishes and choose. But Esther stands out. She's wise, she listens, she gains favor with literally everyone she meets, and she becomes the queen. But she keeps one detail secret. She's Jewish, which at this point feels like a small thing, but in this story, small details do a lot of heavy lifting. Meanwhile, Mordecai, the cousin that raised her, overhears a plot to assassinate the king. He reports it, the king's life is saved, and his reward? He gets written down in a book. That's it. No parade, no bonus, no employee of the month, just we'll circle back. Which we all know, historically speaking, means we will not be circling back. Enter Haman. Now we meet this guy. Haman is promoted to a high position, like second in command. The king says everyone has to bow to him, and everyone does, except Mordecai. Now, we're not told exactly why Mordecai refuses, but Haman takes it personally. And by personally, I mean, I will now destroy your entire ethnicity personally. That's not a normal escalation. That's like someone cutting you off in traffic and you responding, guess I'm invading their homeland now. So Haman convinces the king to sign a decree. On a certain day, all Jews are to be killed, and the king signs it like he's approving a lunch order. No questions. Just sounds official. So now we see Mordecai hears about this and goes into full mourning mode. Sackcloth, ashes, public grief. Esther hears and sends word like, hey, you okay? Because she doesn't know about the decree. And Mordecai basically responds, not really. Also, you need to fix this. And he tells her to go to the king. Now here's the catch. If you were to approach the king uninvited, you can be executed, which makes office politics today feel a little less stressful. So Esther's like, I haven't even been called in 30 days, which in modern terms is basically, I don't think I'm on his calendar. And Mordecai hits her with, who knows if you've come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Translation, this is your moment. Please don't ghost your destiny. So Esther doesn't rush in. She calls for a 3-day fast. No food, no water, which tells you this is serious. Nobody fasts like that for a casual meeting. And then she says, if I perish, I perish. Which is both incredibly brave and also the most composed way to say this could go very badly. She goes to the king. He spares her. He says, what do you want? Up to half my kingdom, I will give it to you. And she says, come to a banquet. Bring Haman. That's it. Then at the banquet, he asks again. She says, come back tomorrow. Bring Haman again. Now, at this point, you've got to imagine the king thinking, this better be good. Meanwhile, Haman is having a great day. Private dinner with the king and queen. He's second in command. He got this decree taken, put in. He's got all these things happening. He's wearing the king's signet ring. He's feeling elite. Then he sees Mordecai, still not bowing, and it ruins everything. This man has power, wealth, influence, and one guy standing upright is enough to emotionally collapse him. So his wife and friends, doing the responsible thing, say, just build a gallows and hang him, which is aggressive advice. And Haman's like, perfect, I'll do that. I'll build it extra tall. Because if you're going to be petty, commit, right? So that very night, the king can't sleep. And instead of scrolling his phone, because, ancient Persia, he asks for the royal records to be read, which is basically the original sleep aid. And they just happen to read about Mordecai saving his life. And the king says, what was done to honor him? Answer, nothing. And at that exact moment, Haman walks in. Perfect timing, totally wrong reason. The king asks him, what should I do for the man that I want to honor? And Haman gets a big head, fully convinced this is about him, and goes all out. Royal robes, the king's horse, public parade, just make the biggest deal about it. And the king says, great, I want you to do that for Mordecai. You can almost hear the silence. That's not just awkward, that's like biblical level awkward. So now we hit the climax. At the second banquet, the king asks again, what do you want? And Esther finally says, my people are going to be destroyed, and I'm one of them. And then points at Haman. This guy, he's the one. The king is furious, so much so he gets up and walks out. Haman panics, and in his panic, he falls onto Esther right as the king walks back in, which is the worst possible timing. The king sees it and goes, are you assaulting the queen in front of me? And one of his servants chimes in like, oh, also he built a giant gallows in his yard. The king, perfect. Use it. Haman is executed. Mordecai is elevated. Esther's people are saved. And the decree that was meant to destroy them gets flipped. They're allowed to defend themselves, and they win. And what was supposed to be a day of mourning becomes a celebration. Purim. So here's what makes Esther hit differently. God never speaks out loud in this book. No miracles, no spectacle, just timing, courage, and people making decisions under pressure, which sounds a lot like real life. Sometimes you don't get clarity, you get a moment. Sometimes you don't get certainty, you get responsibility. And like Esther, the question isn't always, do I feel ready? Sometimes it's, Am I willing to step in anyway? Thanks for sticking around, you guys. You are legends. If you enjoyed this, grab some merch. We've got tees, hoodies, and all the good stuff. Every single dollar from sales goes straight into charity. I don't make a cent. So when you buy, you're actually doing good. Links in the bio. Now go be awesome.